Hey, good morning, everyone. This is Nevin Gusak, the host of New Ideas, formerly known as the Politically Homeless Podcast. Of course, we're still politically homeless in spirit over here on this show. And with me is our friend of the show, Mr. Pat Choate, or I should say Dr. Choate. He is a professional economist. He was a former vice presidential candidate in the 1996 candidacy of Ross Perot, the famous American businessman. Mr. Choate has been involved in the Reform Party. He has been involved in numerous think tanks and study groups in all levels of government. He's been involved in the world of business, notably in TRW Incorporated. He is a prolific author of numerous books, which I have in my personal library, which helped shape my economic thinking, by the way, or reshaped my economic thinking, some of which included Saving Capitalism, Dangerous Business, and Agents of Influence, all excellent books that I urge you to either purchase or at least get from your local library. You can find Dr. Choate's videos all over YouTube, or do a Google video search where you can hear his insights, and it's just absolutely brilliant. And we love Pat. We love Pat's works and insights on the economy and politics and world events. And thankfully, Pat is getting back into the arena of politics and advising various office holders on matters of policy. So welcome back to the show, Pat, and thanks for joining us.
Nevin, thank you. It's great to be back with you. And thank you for the words.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate it. No problem. So a little introduction. So you've been getting back into the ring, so to speak, with policymaking. Did you want to share with us some of your latest work or writing projects, political advisement, etc.?
Yeah, I'm really working with a couple of groups of members of the House of Representatives. One group is on intellectual property, on how to protect the inventors, and how that relates to China. And the second is on the question of sustainable energy, how we make this shift to far less expensive energy, sustainable energy, and how we take on the challenge that China is presenting us on this.
No, that's absolutely been a long-running challenge, especially the issue of free trade versus fair trade or protectionism, protection of national industries. The threat of communist China has been around for a very, very, very long time, obviously, longer than I've been alive. And now that China has been given first the Nixon opening from starting in 1969 through 1972 to President Jimmy Carter's granting of full diplomatic relations and the development of what was termed most favored nation trading status, which has existed for other nations before even World War II, from what I understand. But that was conferred by President Carter, which we at this show, at least for me, is considered a colossal mistake for many reasons. And then that was granted, every 2 years. And there was opposition in elements of both parties. And then the game changer, unfortunately, was when, and I remember this specifically, when Bill Clinton signed into law the China Trade Relations Act, I believe that was which conferred permanent normal trade relations, which means that China basically is literally granted permanent most favored nation trading status, so it's no longer up to congressional review. Now, one of the reasons why I supported Donald Trump in 2016, one of the many reasons, was because he brought at least the issue of trade and deindustrialization and the threat of China as a core issue. I remember when I was involved in the Republican clubs, and there were really some very good people I met there, but there were others that were more preoccupied with the threat of fundamentalist Islam, and really China was not considered a threat. or you're viewed as kind of a cranky protectionist or whatnot. You got to get with the program. After all, it's all about freedom. China's not a threat, or China is a market, a rapidly becoming a market economy. Of course, I had an entirely different opinion. When Trump came around, he really shifted the conversation. In the 2016 presidential campaign and every presidential campaign afterwards, the issue of tariffs, the issue of reindustrialization, of trade, of China, and the intersection of economics and national security has become much more of a bigger preeminent issue, which is excellent. Now, I'm sure you probably have seen this, Pat, is now there are legislators on both sides of the aisle in Congress that are bringing up, like Tom Suozzi, for example, is a Democratic congressman from New York, from the area that I used to live in the North Shore of Long Island. They're bringing up legislation, serious legislation, that's going to challenge PNTR for China, which I think is an excellent move. I think that's a very important first step. So what are any comments to what I have stated before we delve into the Kiel policy brief on China and some recommendations on how we can start addressing the China economic threat?
Well, first, we've got to recognize it as a country. We still don't recognize it as a country, as such. What we have done with the policies of George H.W. Bush and with Bill Clinton that really created the post-Soviet era trade policy is what we have done is we have tried to impose on the rest of the world an Anglo-American rules-based economic system that is attempting to do free trade. That's the ideological model that we've tried to do. And what has happened is the rest of the world has said, yes, oh, yes, we do this. And at the same time, they've done everything they can to create exceptions in those rules. And in the process, what we have had in the United States is we have deindustrialized in this country. And what that means is last year, this nation ran a goods trade deficit. In other words, we imported more goods, things, than we exported by an amount of $1.1 trillion. It's a historic level. And it has gone up year by year since the administration of Bush 1. We're literally at a point. We cannot produce most things in this country because we are dependent either whole or in part on China and other nations, not just China, but other nations for the component parts. The supply chains are such that we're not independent. We cannot fight a long war any longer. There was once upon a time that we could fight war in 2 theaters and then 1.5 theaters and then 1 theater. We cannot fight a long-term war in 1 theater, Europe or Asia. We quite literally, when we run out of the store of munitions that we have, we do not have the capacity to replace them quickly or in many cases not at all. The American people do not really understand that at this point. And at the same time, what we're seeing with China is that they, and as is South Korea, as is Japan, have moved to dominate critical industries. They're using soft power, the economic power, to gain leverage. And we're going to see this happen over the next several months. I mean, Donald Trump is put his fingers on a key problem. This is what Perot and I were working on. I've worked with many members of Congress in between on, is the deindustrialization. As Trump moves to impose tariffs, what he's going to find is there will be an imposition of on the United States of bans of sending certain materials into the United States, even if they pay the tariff. The whole effort by China and other countries will be to literally shut down parts of our economy. In the first Trump administration, what China did was refuse to buy soybeans and other agricultural products. Most of the tariffs that were collected had to go to subsidize farmers to keep them from literally losing their farms. We're going to see that in industry after industry. The point to all of this, and that I hope that the nation leads to understand, is we must rebuild our base. We must rebuild our capacity to make things. And Trump has pinpointed the right problem. He's pinpointed the urgency of dealing with it as such. The approach I fear that he's taking on won't work. There are other better ways for him to do this.
Yeah, no, I think you hit upon some very key points about the fact that we can't fight a war, and that's been an issue that, as you remember, Patty, even as far back, or a prolonged war, I should say, with a major industrial power. I remember reading, for example, reports, hearings, excerpts of hearings from the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House during the 1980s, and books written by the conservative anti-communist former Judge Robert Morris. Wrote books in the 1980s which all pointed this out, along with many other people in the USBIC, the U.S. Business and Industry Council, and other groups, which talked about how generals like General Wickham, for example, in 1987 said, look, we could not fight a war against a prolonged war against the Soviet Union more than, I think, at least 6 months, I believe is what he said. It's a very serious problem. It's gotten worse to the point where we're having problems supplying Ukraine with weapons, where we have to rely more on Europe, the more industrialized countries in Europe. And now, of course, we see that Germany is also having starting to get a deindustrialization creep as well. We'll talk about the Kiel policy brief on China to begin in a few minutes. We just take a look at all this. We look at the fact that we could not supply Taiwan and our armed forces to help defend Taiwan in a war against China. There were generals that have recently warned that. I don't have the quotes in front of me, that's been recent news within the past few months. And, those of you who want to check out all the specifics can visit my Substacks page at Wilderness of Mirrors. They could also visit the library or go on Amazon.com and check out Dr. Choate's books. I mean, let's take a step. Really, you mentioned the Anglo-American idea of trade and economics, and there is a clash. The world does not necessarily operate according to those strictures. And this is where economists, not you, Pat, and not Peter Navarro, who's back again in the Trump administration, they're obviously dissenters within the economic community, but most liberal, or if you want to call them libertarian or classical liberal, or you've termed it on previous interviews, market absolutists or market fundamentalists, they seem to not want to recognize, for I think various reasons, that other countries have different goals for trade and economics. It's not all about maximizing, quote, economic returns and profits and all the rest of it. They really lose the plot when it comes to analyzing the actual economic history, as well as what's termed either externalities or multiplier effects that can be negative. What are China's intentions? Now, I don't want to sound like, again, like some crazy anti-communist Cold War nut job. We'll call it nut job Nevin over here. No, this is what the Chinese are saying in their own official publications. This is their strategy, and I think the viewers have to understand what their strategy and their intentions are. Let's take a look at what the two Chinese People Liberation Army colonels, Qiu Liang and Wang Jiangshui, wrote in their work, Unrestricted Warfare, that economic aggression could lead, I'm reading from one of my essays, quote, a defeat on the economic front, that's their words, which in turn would result in a, quote, near collapse of the social and political order. Mi Jinyu of the Research Institute of Foreign Trade and Economic Cooperation in the Chinese Ministry of Commerce noted, quote, to keep pace, you need to have the capability to attack the other side. The same is true for trade. Lastly, more recently, Zhang Tengjun wrote in the Chinese Communist Party's Global Times, which is available online for you to read, the price the West will have to pay for its sanctions against Russia is different from that for its sanctions, if any, against China. It is the largest trading partner of most countries worldwide with an irreplaceable position in the global industrial chain, supply chain, value chain, and regional and global influence. Any severe sanction against China will significantly backfire, will be a lose-lose situation from any point of view. We should be confident in the Chinese government's ability to deal with external pressure and know that anyone who cracks down on China will have to pay a huge price that they simply cannot afford. Now, why am I reading this? Well, because we got to know what China's intentions are, and that was my first two quotations. And the third one is to show you cannot trust a communist or any other totalitarian expansionist nation. You can't trust economic cooperation with them. Their intentions are different. You become dependent on them, they have you potentially nailed on the wall. It's like the bully at the school. They'll leave you alone a little bit. They'll continue to extort you and extort you. You let them get away with it. And at a point, and this is where Trump and portions of the Republican and Democratic parties are saying, hey, wait a minute, this is a problem. And then the bully has you in a chokehold, and the bully is stronger than you. Now, the good news is that, and this is where I agree with you, Pat, America, one of our key strengths is there is an element within our populace that is very practical minded. We tend to be very resilient. You look what happened before World War II, where we're not militarily prepared. Yes, we had the industrial base, granted, but we had to retool, which was a monumental effort. We do have a culture of innovation here. It's not to say other countries don't, but we do have that here. So we can do this, but it's going to take tremendous political will. It's going to have to take the unity of both parties, where they're going to say, okay, we're going to put aside partisan BS, if you excuse the term. We have a problem. This is a national emergency, and we're going to do this without provoking potential war with China. You don't want to provoke war with China, so this is going to have to be handled with extreme finesse. And it's going to have to involve a wide menu of different policy options, which we'll talk about. Now, you unearthed, and you can summarize it, the Kiel policy brief on China. Now, you sent that to me. It's an excellent report. And the reason why I would consider it a credible source, it's not from some biased, hardcore anti-communist, even though I am a hardcore anti-communist. It's not an ideological institute. The Kiel Institute is basically an establishment economic policy institute in Germany that does not seem to particularly have an ideological agenda either way. And it outlined how Chinese predatory trade practices have affected three industrial sectors in Europe, in the EU member countries. That is what they term it railway rolling stock, which is railroad cars and locomotives, battery operated or battery electric vehicles, BEVs or EVs,
Right.
as well as also wind energy or wind turbines, which now we know, the current administration is very unfriendly towards. But it still is a sector that China is working to overtake the world in. They are not leaving any technological stone uncovered. They are looking to dominate the global market, the global supply chain in every sector. And that's part of their vision for 2025. I mean, that's not the right terms for it, but that's what China has outlined is become the preeminent global manufacturing power by this year, which is 2025. Did you want to elaborate more on the report before we continue?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Uh, First of all, the Kiel Institute is been in business for more than a century. It is one of those institutions whose purpose is to assess the economy, geopolitical institutions, and take a perspective from a German point of view. They want to know what Germany is facing in the world and why it's useful for us. And this is printed in both English and in German. Why it's useful for us is what it's showing about the Chinese challenge to Germany, an advanced industrial state. It also shows about to the United States, an advanced state. And what the Kiel Institute did in this was to take a look and to unravel the industrial policies of Japan on these industries, on solar, on wind, on batteries. And when I say batteries, this is for automobiles and it's for these large shipping container sized batteries for storing electricity and for railroad stock, which is a major transport. And what they report goes really beyond those four specific industries. It goes to a whole range of industries. And what becomes very clear here is how China, since really effectively since the late 1970s, publishes these 5-year plans. And in these 5-year plans, they identify the targets to develop the Chinese economy. And once an industry is targeted, then all of the resources and focus of the Chinese government and economy is focused to that. And what one must remember is that ultimately all of the export industries, no matter what face is put on it, how it's described, is owned by the Chinese government. It is really China Inc. that we're dealing with here. And so, in some of the interesting documentation that they put forth, which I think is unique, because I think this is a unique study, as someone who studied this, is they identify that the Chinese government provides subsidies in a variety of ways to 93,000 Chinese companies. The second thing that they show is that the level of that government support is multiple times of what the Europeans, what the Germans, who do subsidize their industries, and the French do, and what the European community as a whole does, and certainly what we do as an industry. And as part of that report, they also show how one of the things they do is local content requirements. That aid is given for the companies. They must be inside the country. And so the Chinese government has set up a barrier. With the Japanese, we said, oh, if you want to sell here, you've got to make them here. And to do that, the Chinese basically say, no, you can't do that. America, you can have the products, but you can't have the factories and you can't have the technology. The other thing that the Chinese do is they have a whole series of other tools. One is the simple scale, the largeness of the Chinese market. And basically, so they will refuse to allow competitive products in to compete with them, which means that the Chinese can develop, they have their own market, they build up a big base where they can get scales and economy of production, and then they can surge into the world and take other markets. The Chinese provide intelligence to their industry. They do very detailed analysis of markets. They will intervene with other governments and make foreign policy issues an economic issue, and basically say, for example, that you must cancel your recognition of Taiwan if you want our assistance and help. They also move forward and have put into place a major series of infrastructure projects around the world. Ports, they have control the two major ports on both sides of the Panama Canal. They control and operate the Long Beach port in the United States. They are in control in Toledo, Ohio, that port. They control ports around the world so that they can have this easy and quick movement of Chinese goods to anywhere in the world so that they can facilitate the movement. The other thing is on rail, in creating rail networks to move Chinese products. And so they have invested very heavily in railroad technologies and both passenger and freight movement to move to dominate those industries as such. It's a very scary look at an economy that's government controlled, means of production are government controlled, that tie their diplomacy and their economics together into a unified package that they're presenting to the world. And the goal is to dominate the soft economic power that comes with that.
Yeah, and that's a perfect description, what you have outlined based on the Kiel policy brief, as well as the history and the actually not only even the history of China's trade practices, which you outlined so richly in the report, but also the current structure of the Chinese economy, which is not only state dominated, but there is still a large scale of state ownership of the means of production, as you put it, even during the time of the so-called quote-unquote reforms of Deng Xiaoping, which had a number of so-called conservatives enamored that China is becoming a market-based economy. I'm sure you're familiar with this reference source, Pat. Remember the white hard-covered country studies series? They used to be the U.S. Army handbook series that were green covered. Well, the one on China, which came out, I think, in 1985, still said a little over 50% of the industries were state-owned. And of course, when you look at what the leaders and the party publication said during the 1980s, they were saying, look, we're taking a page out of Lenin's NEP. We are not destroying socialism. We are making it more efficient. We're still having a command economy. They've even quoted Stalin. And I cover this in my works on when Stalin also was open to the use of foreign business technicians to help build the Soviet economy. So just kind of keeping things in perspective. It's so funny because I don't want to digress. I was listening to a debate. It kind of made my hair hurt when they were talking about China, the economist Art Laffer versus Richard Wolff. And Art Law, I actually agreed at one point, this pains me to say this, with Richard Wolff when he's saying, rebutting Art Laffer, who was saying that, oh, China was like this free market paradise and they liberalized all over the place. And he was making it, waxing so eloquent about China. And it was Richard Wolff, who is more of an advocate of Marxism, was saying, no, the state dominates the economy, it's state ownership. And yeah, I have my criticisms of the PRC, but he basically said, he was basically debunking Laffer. And I'm going to put this in American terms, what you were talking about, citing the Kiel Policy Institute report. It reminded me of an article I read in the New York Times, which I quote in one of my books, Turning the Page, and it recounted how a former Apple computer executive, how when an Apple team visited China, the plant owners were constructing a new wing of their plant already. And what does it say? The Chinese government agreed to underwrite costs for numerous industries. The subsidies had trickled down to the glass cutting factory for the development of the new iPhone screens. They had on-site dormitories. They had company barracks. They had free energy, free land, discounted services. I mean, it just was absolutely incredible. It was really unbelievable. So you have this combination of cheap labor, currency manipulation, which the currency manipulation started actually, I was surprised, in the early 1980s when Victor Riesel, if you remember, he was a former anti-communist labor union columnist, wrote an article in Human Events, and he was sounding the alarm on this when China started under Carter and especially Reagan dumping textiles into the American market. One of the ways they were able to dump goods into the American market at a favorable exchange was through currency manipulation, through basically undervaluing what was termed the yuan, which is the national currency. And and this just continued. You have the state-owned industries, as you pointed out. You have the state-owned banks. You have massive amounts of credit being pumped into the economy. I mean, it just is absolutely incredible. And, there is this seeming let's get it done attitude of a totalitarian state, while you have in a liberal democracy or a constitutional republic, you have all these interest groups that are just at war with each other, and they don't have a common image. In fact, for example, this New York Times article quotes the current Apple executive noted that we sell iPhones in over 100 countries. We don't have an obligation to sell America's problems. Our only obligation is making the best product possible. So you compare that, where you have our business elite, many within the business elite not having any real loyalty to the country. Compare that with China, where granted you have bureaucratic rivalries and corruption and everything, but at least outwardly everyone's on the same page on national development goals, if you will, and also political goals in remaking the world in concert with Russia and other countries in their own image. So, yeah, I mean, this is a huge problem with China. They, of course, have the forced technology exchanges. And I have the from the Ministry of Commerce in China with the the Chinese Foreign Equity Joint Ventures Law that was developed as far back as 1979 under Deng Xiaoping, where it says the People's Republic of China shall permit foreign companies, enterprises, blah, 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 that does the law. But there's a point where they say that if for any reason, just get this down here, the technology and equipment contributed by a joint venture as an investment must be really advanced technology, I'm reading the law, and equipment that suits China's needs. In case of losses caused by a foreign joint venture and it's practicing deception, well, how do they prove that? Through the intentional provision of outdated technology and equipment, it shall compensate for the losses. So you see these, when you read laws developed by totalitarian states, there are always these very vague terms. Well, what constitutes deception? How do they know it's intentional? With a government without any checks and balances, that's one party and totalitarian, you can't trust them to really carry out the word. So, for example, you get situations where you have to the point of outright theft of property. Remember what happened with McDonnell Douglas when they had their machine tools? They set up their factories in China. They exported machine tools and whatnot. It was stolen. A lot of that equipment was stolen. There are many other cases of forced technology transfers. And now more and more businesses are looking, multinational corporations are, some at least, are rethinking their investments in the People's Republic of China. Of course, what concerns me is they're not going back to the lower 48 states. They're looking to other countries, and that concerns me because we need to get our industries back within our borders, within all 50 states within the Union. With that, in discussing all this, our last part of the show that I wanted to talk to you So we've outlined the problems. We've outlined the challenges. One of the good things about the Keel report, I think the best part, frankly, that they really brought out was this, and I think this is the core of the problem we have to get over. And the Keel Institute report said, seen from the textbook lens, there is a strong case against the introduction of such tariffs on subsidized imports. This is substantiated by the view that subsidies are, quote, gifts of the donor, which is a play on Milton Friedman's, quote, gifts to the consumer, which raise the real income of recipients of gifts, the European consumers, while strengthening their comparative advantages in other non-subsidized sectors. And I jump ahead, yet the textbook lens may neglect a dynamic perspective, including geopolitical externalities, which we talked about, path dependencies, and the issue of technology control in key industries. And with that stated, I think that's a very important part where one of the
it is really packed with a lot of important thoughts in that sentence.
Exactly. I find there are a couple of factors. One which you mentioned, we're ideologically still not, I don't want to say getting rid of, because it's not all negative, but we're not adopting a more pragmatic view. We're still on this sort of Anglo-American libertarian view of trade and economy. We're too caught up with ideology and not actually how the real world works. And that's partially an issue in politics, and part of the issue is in the economics field. Secondly, my concerns about the incoming administration, they have some very good people in there, but they also have people who do not believe in what is termed a whole of government strategy. And the way to intelligently confront the economic as well as military political threats of Russia, China, their allies, is through a whole of government strategy, where we have to be unified, where we have to look at what policies have worked, what have not, what has made the problem work, and move forward accordingly. Thirdly is the issue of campaign finance and lobbying issues, which you have pointed out. When we get down to the nitty-gritty, I know you and I were talking online about some policy prescriptions, tariffs, or in place of a tariff, maybe a value-added tax, which many other countries use. What are some tools that we can use right now to reshore our manufacturing from China and elsewhere?
Okay, let me I consider myself, I'm an economist, I consider myself a political economist, where economics is not in isolation, it's done within the context of institutionals, economist. Let's have one clear distinction here as we talk about solutions. First, the Anglo-American model is based upon the concept that you want entrepreneurs and you want business people and you want capitalists to produce and to maximize efficiency. And in that maximize efficiency, literally produce competitive products. And you put in antitrust laws to make sure that you don't have trust or oligopolies that are in effect undermining that dynamic. And government basically is to provide a series of other functions and make the market work as such. But the real control is the dynamics of Adam Smith's hidden hand in the operation of the economy. And the assumption is that the better good will come out of that. And for us, for many years, that's the way it worked. On the other hand, the Chinese model says that the economy is like society or like government is controlled by the government. And this is a group of people that are not engaged in making money or maximizing efficiency. Their purpose is to pursue certain national goals, is to make sure that they have prosperity, that they have security for their people, that they can manage the chaos, the ups and downs of recessions and depressions. And so in that model, they will have and have had a whole of government approach to achieve certain objectives. Well, we're in a position where when our model has come against their model is winning, our model is losing. So we need to make an adaptation on our model. And in that adaptation is to simply say, we're not going to accept the deindustrialization of our economy, our ability to produce things, our ability to be independent of the whims of other countries or the designs of other countries. So now we move to a situation where we say a government intervention is necessary. So the first thing is to recognize the problem. Donald Trump has recognized the problem. He's not articulating it well, but he is recognizing it and he's describing major symptoms of that problem. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the question of how do we deal with that? What initiatives must we deal with? So the first is that we need to stop the commercial predation of China. And that's what it is. It is commercial predation. And so in doing that, the first thing that we need to do is to defend our industry from predation. Our industries alone cannot defend themselves. Even our largest corporations cannot defend themselves against the government of China, who can put unlimited amounts of money that can distort the markets around the world by dumping their products at non-competitive prices, and they can do it for years until they control that market, and then they can come in and have monopoly prices and monopoly control. So that's the one thing to do. And so the first place you start is denying them access to this market. And tariffs is one way to do it in doing that. A simpler way is just have local content laws that basically say you can't sell it here unless you make it here as such. And then you put conditions on that. So that's the access and the support. Second thing is it's going to be necessary to provide support to these industries. We really need, in our major research labs and our expenditures on monies, we need to be able to focus research. China has focused research, for example, on rail, on energy, on batteries, on a whole series of machine tools, a whole series of essential industries to move to the advance. We need to take, we spend massive amounts of money on research in the government. We need to focus on, we need to set priorities and do focusing there. Then a third thing that we need to do in this process is recognize that the Chinese have had a massive program of intellectual theft. They've taken our technology, they've stolen our technology, they've used our technology and used it against us. In doing one book about called Hot Property, the theft of ideas in the world, I documented how the Chinese have massive bureaus of engineers, and their whole job is to go through the patent systems of other countries and review those patents and technology and see which are be useful, and so that they then steal them. They literally take those patents and rewrite them as make them, quote, Chinese patents, apply them in China, and no goods can come into China that involves those technologies. They then take those same technologies and put it in the goods that are export so that they can stay cutting edge. What I would suggest doing is, as we did in World War I and World War II with Germany, we simply cancel all Chinese patents in the United States. We just simply say that any company can use any Chinese technology. They effectively have canceled our patents in China. We need to do the same here. Make it available to our people. So we need on the technology side. The other thing we need to do is reverse the patent laws that were put in by Barack Obama. Barack Obama's first administration, his patent commissioner, was the head counsel, head IP guy for IBM. For his second, it was the head IP person for Google. They changed the patent laws. And in those changes in the patent laws, the patent no longer goes to the person who invents, the first to invent. It goes to the first person to file for a patent at the patent office. The second thing that was done in the Clinton administration is they require publication. If you file for a patent, it goes in and you must pay the patent office to publish that patent, the application. And after 18 months, you must the patent office publish. So you have an idea, write a patent, send it to the patent office, 18 months. They still haven't processed it. The average time is about 24 months. And so you publish on the world your idea. And it goes to everybody. You don't have protection of a patent, but you've disclosed everything that you've invented in that patent. And as a consequence of this, small companies and individual inventors can't really defend themselves on that, because by the time they get a patent, the Chinese are producing the good and bringing it to market. And so basically, what I would do is certainly eliminate that. You don't have the government force inventors to reveal their secrets to the world. So I think that becomes necessary. And then the major issue and change that we've talked about is the differential in tax systems. The United States uses a corporate tax, and a corporate tax takes a percentage of profits. I think around 21% for corporations at this point. The rest of the world, their primary system is called a value-added tax. It is a production tax. Most Americans view it as a sales tax. It is not. Basically, what happens in a production tax, at each stage, a company will pay a tax on the value added. So if you have a 10% value added tax and you're making a shirt is the final product, the farmer will send the cotton in to the mill, and he'll pay, if it's a 10% tax, he'll pay 10% on the sales price. Then you'll wind up with the weaving company weaving the cloth. They'll add, let's say, 30% of value, and so they pay a tax on that. So they'll pay the 10% on that 30, and right on down to the retailer. Well, the way this is set up in the rest of the world is based on a French model developed in the 1950s. As France was lowering tariffs under trade talks, it needed another barrier to keep imports from coming in. And so what they did is they had a 10% value-added tax. And on that value-added tax, what they would do is they literally, if you exported your goods, you got a rebate on that tax. That's a subsidy. That's a big subsidy. Right. The second thing is if a product came in from the United States, they added that 10% onto it. So the American product had to carry a 10% tax inside France. That cut its competitiveness. And in the United States, the French product got a 10% subsidy. Well, at this point, we have something like all other nations, 165 other nations, have this value added tax. And so it provides them both a subsidy to export to the United States, and it provides them a means, a barrier to keep the American products from being productive. In Europe, the average value added tax is 21%. Very few American corporations are so competitive that they can add 21% to their price and still be competitive. There's very few American companies are so competitive that a company coming in with a 21% subsidy from Germany can compete in the domestic market. And that has been a major cause of our deindustrialization. So one of the things that American companies have done is they have moved their factories to be in countries that have the VAT and also have cheap labor and also have low regulatory costs. That is a major thing. Our tax system, as much as our trade policy, is forcing our nation to deindustrialize and make things. Trump should change that. So if were I advising Trump, I would say, absolutely, explain the problem even more detail. The American people can understand this. I mean, I've been through the NAFTA fight. They can get this. The second thing is literally impose a tariff equal to the amount of VAT that country imposes. Germany has a 19% VAT. Impose a 19% tariff on German goods. France has a 20%, impose a 20%. Italy has a 21%, impose a 21%. And say to them, that will stay on here until you stop subsidizing your exports with your VAT, and you stop imposing that VAT on American imports. In other words, it's a negotiation. You can do it country by country. You're not saying don't use the VAT to collect revenues, but do not use it as a trade weapon, which is what they're doing right now. Those are some of the things that I think and hope he can do it. I'm preparing some op-eds on that right now with a member of Congress who I won't mention, but to start getting attention. We need to shape this debate. I mean, he's on the track. He's on the right track.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And since you're in contact with members of Congress again, as you just mentioned, what do you feel is the political will to really do something? Do you think I, of course, am citing media and whatnot. What do you see on the ground now that you're getting back into the game? What do you see now going on? But that's, I guess, my last question before we wrap up.
Well, basically, what I see is an understanding of majority of Congress on this question of the deindustrialization. And they understand it is a peril to the United States. And they're willing to do something. And they will support Trump in this. It is not, and this will include Democrats, many, many Democrats. This is not Trump bluffing them or bullying them, etc. He's providing the excuse and the means. They are willing to let him take the heat in doing this, and he is willing to take the heat, and it is a good thing. I would say something else about Peter Navarro. Peter Navarro is a horrible PR person. He really, honest to God. I mean, I wish somebody would sit him down and give him some media lessons. The second thing, he gets out of his lane. He gets into things like COVID and this and that. He shouldn't do that. But I also want to say he is a great economist. Mm-hmm. His books and his analysis of China are just spot on. And so as your audience hears Peter Navarro, separate Navarro, the personality, and Navarro, the economist. The economist is terrific.
Yeah, and you cite him in your works too as well. I remember specifically. and he's very good on the documentary. I urge people to view it, Death by China, of which he was one of the producers. So I know people who have met him, and he does seem like a very forthright fellow. I mean, what agree or disagree with his views, you know. But yeah, I totally agree. Policy-wise, Peter Navarro is one of the real good ones. Apparently, there's talk of Kyle Bass, who is a hedge funder, but he got really burned in investing with China and has become a bit of a China hawk, and he is be considered for a treasury position. Agree or disagree with Scott Besson's other positions on financial regulation, deregulation. He is at least rhetorically solid on tariffs and the need to reindustrialize as a result. So Trump has some people, at least on the trade issue, that are pretty solid. And Howard Lutnick, I don't know much about him other than as Cantor Fitzgerald in the wake of 9/11. He really took care of his employees, for example. So, we have to watch and wait carefully. And as I do on this show and in my writings, call ball and my social media on Twitter or X, call balls and strikes. We have to applaud Trump, just like I applaud Biden for the good things that he's done, as well as also the bad things that Biden or Trump has done. We'll have to call them out too as well. Remember, this is a policy-oriented debate because it really comes down to not political party or ideology. It's what policy works for the national interest and how do we preserve the United States of America in perpetuity for future generations. So that's all I care about. So, Pat, do you have anything you want to wrap up before we end the show?
No, thank you very much for inviting me. I think this is a topic that will move to the center of this administration. One of the problems that we have is most of the political reporters do not understand the economics and are unable to sort out what's important and not important. And so those of us that are involved in these issues just need to keep plugging and educating.
Absolutely. No question about it. Thank you so much for Pat for joining us. I'm sure we'll be talking again on the show. We're going to have lots to talk about in the coming months or years ahead.
We are. Thank you very much, Nevin.
All righty. Thank you all. God bless everyone and enjoy your weekend.